Hola, hello, and welcome to our podcast, episode number 43, Infection Unleashed, Terror Inside an Apartment Building. I'm Timothy, and as always, here with me, my very good friend, Thomas. Today, we're going to talk about a film called R.E.C. As always, spoilers ahead. R.E.C. is a 2007 Spanish found footage horror film about a television crew covering an emergency call to an apartment building where they discover an infection spreading inside, leading to a strict quarantine. The story revolves around reporter Angela Vidal and her cameraman Pablo, who try to survive the night alongside two firefighters while uncovering dark secrets about the virus's origins.
So, Tom,
did you enjoy R.E.C.?
Well, I have to say I was pleasantly surprised by R.E.C., Timothy. It's not typically the kind of movie I go for. I tend to prefer something a bit more cerebral, you know. But this one really had me on the edge of my seat.
Well, Tom, I have to say that I agree with you. It's not your typical horror film, but it does deliver some genuine scares and tension. The found footage technique works quite well here.
Yes. I think the handheld camera really adds to the sense of claustrophobia and confusion that the characters are experiencing. You feel like you're right there with them as they try to unravel this terrifying mystery.
Well, Tom, I have to say that I think the found footage technique is a bit overused these days, but in R.E.C's case, it works quite effectively. It helps to create an immersive experience for the viewer and maintains the film's sense of realism.
That said, I did feel like some of the supporting cast members were a bit one-dimensional at times. They didn't have much depth or development beyond their initial reactions to what was happening around them. But overall, I think the filmmakers did an excellent job of keeping us engaged with the main characters and the central mystery.
Well, Tom, I have to say that I think the filmmakers did a good job of balancing the horror elements with the underlying mystery. As the story unfolds, we learn more about the origins of the virus and its connection to the building's occupants. The revelation about the enzyme and Tristana Medeiros was quite chilling, I have to admit.
Yes, it definitely added another layer of intrigue to the film. And that twist with Angela Vidal discovering her own role in all this, it really elevated the story from a simple creature feature into something much more complex and thought-provoking. It's interesting how they used religious themes throughout the movie as well, with Angela being warned about playing God by isolating Tristana in the penthouse.
Well, Tom, I think that was a clever way of using religion to add depth to the story without making it too preachy or heavy-handed. But let's talk about some of the more gruesome and terrifying moments from R.E.C. There were several scenes that really stood out for me, such as the infected girl attacking her mother and Jennifer biting off Sergio's ear.
Those were definitely some intense moments. And I have to say, I was quite impressed with the practical effects used in those scenes. They looked very realistic and unsettling. But what really got me was the way they used darkness and silence to build tension throughout the film. There were several scenes where we didn't see anything, but heard terrifying noises or screams off screen, which made my skin crawl.
I agree with you there, Tom. The use of sound design was precisely brilliant in R.E.C. It really helped to create an atmosphere of dread and unease that permeated the entire film. And speaking of tension, let's talk about some of the jump scares they used throughout the movie. What did you think about those?
Well, Tim, I have to say that while some of them were quite effective at startling me, others felt a bit too predictable or forced. But overall, I think they were used sparingly enough not to detract from the film's overall quality. And one thing I appreciated was how much of an ensemble piece this movie was. We really got to know all the main characters and their relationships with each other, which made it even more tragic when they started falling victim to the virus.
Well said. Tom. That sense of loss and desperation among the characters added a lot of emotional weight to the film. And speaking of character development, I thought Ngela Vidal was a particularly interesting protagonist. She starts off as this seemingly tough reporter, but quickly reveals her vulnerability under pressure. It's fascinating to watch her transformation throughout the movie.
Precisely. She goes from being somewhat skeptical and detached at first to becoming deeply, emotionally invested in trying to stop the virus and save those around her. And I also appreciated how they didn't shy away from showing her failures or mistakes. She's not a perfect character, which made her more relatable and human, in my opinion.
Well said, Tom. But we must wrap things up here. In conclusion, R.E.C. is an intense and frighteningly realistic horror film that manages to blend elements of mystery, suspense, and even some dark humor into its 85-minute runtime. It's a testament to the found footage subgenre and a prime example of how it can still be used effectively in modern cinema.
Well said, Tim. And speaking of found footage subgenre, did you know that one of the earliest known examples is actually a Spanish film from 1980 called Gorilla, The Taking of Patty Hearst? It's about the actual event where Patricia Hearst was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army and follows her captors as they record their actions. Pretty interesting, huh?
Indeed, Tom. That's quite fascinating trivia. And speaking of R.E.C. trivia, did you know that the film was originally intended to be a standalone feature, but eventually spawned 2 sequels and an unofficial remake set in Japan called Quarantine? The success of R.E.C. also led to the creation of an entire franchise known as the Universe, which includes comic books, novels, and a video game.
Well, that's quite impressive. It just goes to show how effective this film was in capturing audiences' imaginations and leaving them wanting more. But what about the actors? Did you happen to find out anything interesting about the cast? Members behind these characters we've grown so attached to?
Sure, Tom. Many of the actors who portrayed the main characters in R.E.C. were relatively unknown at the time. However, Manuela Velasco, who played Ngela Vidal, had previously appeared in a few Spanish TV shows and film. And the actor who played Pablo Ferran-Teresa went on to star in another found footage horror film called The Last Days. As for the director Jaume Balaguero, he also directed another well-known Spanish horror film called Darkness.
That's quite impressive. It seems like everyone involved in this project really put their all into it. And speaking of involvement, I have to say that I was surprised by how much critical acclaim R.E.C. received upon its release. It was even ranked 11 on Bloody Disgusting's list of the top horror films of the decade.
Indeed, Tom. R.E.C. definitely made a splash in the horror community when it came out. And as for me personally, I think one of my favorite aspects of this film is its ability to balance scares with genuine emotional moments. You really feel for these characters as they struggle against the odds and try to survive this terrifying ordeal.
I couldn't agree more. It's rare for a horror movie to be able to evoke such strong feelings from its audience, but R.E.C. definitely manages that. And speaking of emotional investment, what did you think about the ending? That final scene with Angela and her baby really tugged at my heartstrings.
The ending certainly leaves a lasting impact on the viewer, Tom. I think it's both haunting and bittersweet at the same time. We're left to wonder about the fate of these characters and their struggle against this seemingly unstoppable virus. And while we may never know what exactly happened next, that final shot of Angela and her baby provides a glimmer of hope amidst all the chaos and despair.
That's a really interesting perspective, Tim. And speaking of perspectives, I think one of the things that director Jaume Balaguero did so well in R.E.C. was play with different camera angles and filming techniques to create a sense of claustrophobia and chaos throughout the film. The use of night vision cameras, for example, really added to the feeling of being trapped in this dark, terrifying situation.
Absolutely, Tom. I think the found footage style not only helped to create a sense of realism, but also allowed the audience to experience the events through the eyes of the characters. The handheld camera work and shaky footage added an extra layer of tension and unease that would have been lost with a more traditional cinematic approach. And speaking of directing, I was particularly impressed by Balaguero's ability to keep the pacing tight and the scares consistent throughout the film. There were no slow moments or lulls in tension. It felt like one long, unrelenting nightmare.
That's a great point, Tim. And I also think that Balaguero did an excellent job of keeping us engaged with the characters and their relationships. We really get to know these people over the course of the film, which makes it all the more tragic when they start falling victim to the virus. It's a testament to his skills as both a director and a storyteller.
I couldn't agree more, Tom. And speaking of Balaguero, did you know that he originally conceived R.E.C as a short film before expanding it into a feature-length project? Can you imagine how different the final product would have been if he had stuck to his original plans?
That's fascinating. I can only imagine what kind of challenges he faced in adapting such a tight story into something that could sustain an entire feature film. But it just goes to show how much potential there was in this concept from the very beginning. And I have to say, I think they did an amazing job of realizing that potential on screen.
Absolutely, Tom. R.E.C truly is a masterclass in horror filmmaking. It's a rare gem that manages to be both terrifying and emotionally resonant at the same time. And speaking of which, I think it's time we wrap things up here. Before we go, I just want to say how much I enjoyed discussing this film with you today.
Agreed, Tim. This has been a fantastic conversation about one of my personal favorite horror films. And I can't wait for our next podcast episode where we can delve into another thrilling and terrifying cinematic experience together.
Speaking of which, did you have any favorite characters or performances from the film? I thought Manuela Velasco was particularly impressive as Angela Vidal. She really brought a lot of depth and vulnerability to her character. And Ferran Terraz's portrayal of Pablo was also quite compelling.
Exactly. I agree with you about Manuela Velasco. She did an amazing job at capturing the essence of Angela Vidal, from her tough exterior to her emotional breakdowns. Ferran Terraz's performance as Pablo was also quite moving, particularly during his final moments in the film. I found myself really rooting for both these characters and feeling their desperation as they tried to survive this horrifying situation.
And let's not forget about the supporting cast. The other reporters and firefighters all did a fantastic job at adding to the overall atmosphere of chaos and despair. I particularly liked how the relationships between the characters evolved throughout the film, from initial distrust to desperate attempts at survival together. It really added another layer of emotional weight to the story.
That's true. The dynamic between Angela and her cameraman, Angel, was also quite interesting. You could tell that there was some tension there initially, but as they faced more terrifying situations together, they grew closer and began to rely on each other for support. And of course, we can't forget the chilling performance of Jean Balaguero himself as Dr. Owen, who provided a constant source of unease with his cryptic remarks and mysterious actions.
Indeed. The characters in R.E.C are truly what make this film so memorable. They're all well developed and multifaceted, which helps to draw the viewer into their plight. And speaking of character development, I think it's worth mentioning that while some characters do die or become infected, others manage to survive and even grow as a result of their experiences in the film. This adds an extra layer of hope amidst all the despair and chaos on screen.
Exactly. It's rare for a horror film to have such well-rounded characters that you actually care about what happens to them. And I think this is one of the reasons why R.E.C has had such a lasting impact on audiences. It manages to balance its terrifying premise with genuine emotional resonance. So, in conclusion, if there's one thing we can take away from our discussion today about actors and characters in R.E.C., it's that they are truly the heart and soul of this remarkable horror film.
Indeed, Tom. And speaking of influences, it's interesting to note how many other horror films and TV shows have been inspired by R.E.C since its release. You can clearly see its impact in the found footage genre, with countless imitators trying to capture the same raw intensity that this film managed to achieve.
Unquestionably, the Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity, and even the recent Netflix series Bird Box all owe a debt of gratitude to R.E.C for paving the way and showing what could be done within the found footage genre. And while some of these imitators have been successful in their own right, none quite managed to match the sheer terror and emotional depth that R.E.C brings to the table.
That's true. In fact, I think it's safe to say that R.E.C has become something of a benchmark for modern horror films. It's not just about scaring people with jump scares or gore. It's about creating an immersive experience that engages the audience on a deeper level and leaves them thinking long after the credits have rolled. And speaking of which, did you know that there was actually a sequel to R.E.C?
I didn't. That's interesting. What's the story behind R.E.C 2? Did it manage to capture the same magic as the original film?
While not quite as successful as the first one, R.E.C 2 still manages to provide some thrills and chills. It picks up directly where R.E.C left off, with the survivors trying to escape from the infected apartment building. However, they quickly discover that the infection has spread throughout the entire complex. The film continues to explore themes of claustrophobia and desperation, while also delving deeper into the mysterious origins of the virus.
Sounds intriguing. I'll have to check it out sometime. And speaking of checking things out, we should probably start wrapping up our discussion here. But before we go, I just want to say how much I've enjoyed talking about R.E.C with you today, Tim. It's been a fascinating journey through this terrifying world of horror films and their influences.
Unquestionably. And I have to agree with you there. R.E.C is truly one of those rare gems in the horror genre that manages to not only scare, but also engage and move its audience on a deeper level. It's been an honor discussing it with you today, Tom. Here's hoping for more thrilling conversations about movies and TV shows in future episodes.
Absolutely, Tim. And I think it's worth mentioning how well crafted the film is from a technical standpoint. The found footage style works incredibly well here, really immersing you in the world of R.E.C and making you feel like you're part of the action. The shaky cam effect can be jarring at times, but it adds to the overall sense of chaos and disorientation that permeates throughout the film.
I completely agree with you, Tom. And speaking of technical aspects, I also wanted to touch upon the sound design in R.E.C. The use of ambient noise and sudden bursts of screaming or violence really heightens the tension throughout the film. It's one of those things that you might not notice at first glance, but adds so much to your overall viewing experience.
That's a fantastic point, Tim. The sound design in R.E.C is absolutely top-notch and plays a huge role in making this film as terrifying as it is. And with all that said, let me just wrap up my final thoughts on this amazing horror film. R.E.C is truly one of those rare gems that manages to not only scare, but also engage and move its audience on a deeper level. It's a testament to the power of storytelling and how effective found footage can be when done right.
Unquestionably, Tom. And I couldn't agree more. R.E.C is a film that will stay with you long after the credits roll, leaving you pondering its many unanswered questions and contemplating the nature of fear itself. It's a true masterclass in horror cinema that deserves all the praise it has received over the years. So to wrap things up here, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today on our discussion about R.E.C.
Absolutely, Tim. And I want to add my own thanks to you and the audience for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure discussing this incredible film with you all, and we hope that you enjoyed listening in as much as we enjoyed talking about it. So if you liked what you heard, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on this video. We love hearing from our viewers and engaging in further conversations about movies and TV shows, just like R.E.C. Until next time, farewell everyone.